Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 with me, Sam Paton. And this evening I am joined by Roger Mullin from Momentous Change. Hi Roger, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing fine, Sam. Nice to see you again.
It's lovely to see you as well. But first of all, we're going to have a wee coronavirus update, and then I'll come back to you, Roger, and we can have a wee chat this evening about today's news. The coronavirus update as of 2 p.m. today, a total of 1,946,973 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and the UK Government regional testing centres since the start of the pandemic. Of these, 1,719,133 have been confirmed as negative. 227,840 have been tested positive. There are 168 new cases of COVID-19 confirmed via test, although not everyone with the virus will display symptoms, and not all those with symptoms will be tested. And as of today, there were no new reported deaths of people who had tested positive. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection now stands at 7,661. This number only includes those who have died having received a positive test for the virus in the previous 28 days. Of the people who have tested positive, 72 were in hospital last night, 6 of whom were in intensive care. As of 8 a.m. this morning, 2,909,156 people have received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccination, and 1,485,296 have received their second dose. The latest UK daily figure shows 127,609 patients who have tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 4 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings and not just hospitals. And as always, our thoughts are with the families and loved ones of those who have passed away. And those that are in intensive care, wishing you a speedy recovery. Now, we're moving on to election news. If you didn't notice, there was an election at the weekend, so we're going to have a wee blather about this. When is a landslide not a landslide? According to the opposition parties, when it is an SNP landslide, despite winning SNP 64 seats, which is one more than in 2016, the reports in the media and the unionist parties are leading with the response that the SNP failed to achieve an overall majority and therefore do not have a mandate for an independence referendum, conveniently overlooking the 8 seats won by the Scottish Green Party, which also stood on a manifesto commitment to Indie referendum too. Now, Roger, are you surprised about all the reports that are coming out on the media at the moment since Saturday, saying that the SNP have failed and we do not have a mandate for independence? Because it seems to be everywhere, all over the mainstream media. So is this surprising to you at all?
It's not really a surprise to me that the media are spinning it in that way. Indeed, what I would suggest is if there had been a majority, let's say of one, they would have spun that it wasn't a big enough majority to matter. And so I don't think we should concern ourselves over much about that. What we do know is that we have the numbers in the Scottish Parliament. We do know that this has been an absolutely remarkable result to pick up 64 seats. We do know there has been further progress in terms of the overall vote. And so by any measure, particularly after the length of time in the government, by any measure, this has been a remarkable election.
It certainly has. I mean, I think what they're failing to report is this is the most SNP votes they've ever had in the Scottish Parliament. The Green vote was also up at this election. So between the two independence party, or the two parties, with the manifesto of an independence referendum, they've done really, really well. And the majority of people, even the people going out to vote, their figures were up as well. So I think that, obviously the media is going to spin it, but this is a kind of trick that they're failing to talk about, the fact that more people than ever before have voted for independence effectively over the weekend.
Yes, well, and actually you touched on something that for me, being a Democrat, I am particularly pleased about, and that was the rise in the turnout. Those people who are turning out to vote for whoever they wish to vote for.
Yes.
This is fundamentally important in a democracy, and this speaks to the strength, indeed in many ways the increasing strength of the democratic body in Scotland. So I think we should be celebrating the significant rise in those who are voting, as well as celebrating the win for those supporting an independence referendum.
Definitely. Now, going on to the next part of this story. Yeah, Gordon Brown reappears, saying the Labour Party needs to change following their defeat in England. And what can the Scottish Labour Party do when the solution offers are so dependent on the rest of the UK electing a Labour government at some point in future? Can there be a UK federal system which would satisfy the needs of Scotland if it depended on for a voting system for which there was no popular support in England? Now, I don't know about you, Roger, but this morning when I got up, all you seen on the news was Gordon Brown getting wheeled out of whatever crypt that he's been hiding in, getting wheeled out again, telling us all that once again we don't have a mandate for independence, and trying to tell people that Scotland's better off in the UK. What do you think? What's your first impression of Gordon Brown to start off with?
Well, I actually remember Gordon Brown from our student days together at Edinburgh University.
Oh.
And so way back then, in the 1970s, he was arguing more or less what he's continued to argue all his life, that it's just around the corner. We're going to get more support, but always has been an absolutely convinced unionist, and that's just not going to change. So he gets wheeled out every now and again to say the exact same as he's been saying for decades. And so there's nothing surprising there. But I know, as somebody who a few years ago won the Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath seat that he used to hold, his voice has got very little impact nowadays. I don't think his intervention, such as it is going to have make any difference at all to the debate. I don't think he's got anything new to contribute. I think also there's a fundamental problem that the Labour Party have, and basically part of the problem they have is to recognise there is something fundamentally wrong with the way in which they frame their understanding of politics. You know, there are times when major parties have not only a dip in support, but go into periods, for example, of almost terminal decline. Classic example in the UK being what happened to the Liberal Party in the earlier part of the 20th century. What we've had now over a number of years is we've had a leader of the Labour Party who's considered to have been well to the left. We've now got a leader of the Labour Party who's considered to be well to the right, and neither of them have been able to take the Labour Party anywhere near power in the UK. And all the signs are that they are continuing to be diminished. And so I think there are more fundamental problems than they are recognising in their offer to the electorate as a whole, and the way in which they frame their understanding of what is important to people today in society. So I don't think we should pay too much attention to the witterings of Gordon Brown.
Definitely not. I know that the last couple of days I've been just talking to people in general, and as far as they're concerned, Labour, whether it's Labour down in England or Labour in Scotland, no longer represent them as the electorate. What about what about Anas Sarwar? Do you think he's going to make an impact here in Scotland at all,
I'm
regarding
kind of
Labour and take it in a new direction?
I've noticed that there's been quite a lot of, in some parts of the media, of talking up Anas Sarwar and his performance. Well, the Labour
Hmm.
Party, if memory serves me correctly, over the weekend has got less seats now than they had before they entered the election in the Scottish
Yeah,
Parliament.
they've got
They
22
have
now. Yes.
22 now. They have been really pushed into third place, well
Yes.
behind the Tories. And
Yes.
so they have got a huge challenge in their hand. But what I don't hear is any recognition of the fundamental nature of the framing of their offering. I mean, it's saying exactly the same things about Scotland as previous leaders of the Labour Party had in Scotland. And that is, you've got to tie yourself to whatever government Westminster comes up with, whether you like it or not. And that we're going to try and prevent you, the Scottish people, from having a say in how you want to shape your future. Unless that narrative radically changes, I don't see any way back for the Labour Party in Scotland.
No, I agree with you there, Roger. And the other thing that I find it very interesting with a lot of all the union parties is very much they talk about democracy, but when it comes to democracy in Scotland, they always seem to take a different tactic where they start saying that we are not entitled to have a referendum. What do you think about that? Do you think it's one of those ones where it's when democracy suits them, or do you think they
Yeah, well,
see democracy UK wide?
I think that's a game that they're trying to play, but I think they
Yeah,
will find it increasingly difficult to hold to that line as time goes on, and as the will of the Scottish people becomes very clear and is expressed through the new Parliament, with an increased majority of those favouring an independence referendum. Not just that, a majority of those elected favouring Scottish independence itself. So
hmm,
I do think we, on the independence side, do need a little bit of time to prepare ourselves for that referendum. I think we do need to do some further work to help identifying the transition arrangements towards independence. Uh, but from once that is undertaken, I think we will be ready for a referendum in a comparatively short period of time.
definitely, I agree with you there, Roger. Now, moving on to the Lib Dems. Um, with the tactical voting, which was being promoted by the unionist parties and pro-union groups during the Holyrood elections, I keep going to say Hollywood, it's terrible, Holyrood elections, have the Lib Dems tactically voted themselves into oblivion? They've lost 44 deposits and losing group status in the Scottish Parliament. The Lib Dems in Scotland are now in a worse situation than they were in the 2015 general election, when they basically lost their leader, Joe Swinson, to SNP's Amy Callaghan in 2019. So, do you think the Lib Dems have just basically tactically voted themselves out of Scotland during this election and
Well,
made
I
a
think, yeah,
total mess of it, totally misjudged the
well,
electorals?
they have
Roger?
had, at a national level, they've had an absolutely dreadful election, and
Yeah,
deservedly so, in my view. If you look at the 4 seats they have, it delivered in one of them, what I would say is the most amazing result actually for the SNP, and that was in Shetland, when
Yes.
the huge majority that they had was absolutely crushed. And all credit to the long-standing campaigners up in Shetland for the work that they did there. More to the point, however, two of their MSPs that exist in Willie Rennie and in Cole Hamilton in Edinburgh are entirely there because of Tory votes, who put them there by tactical voting. So of the four that remain, the two most senior MSPs are entirely beholden to the Tories. Now, that won't be any problem for them, because if you look at Willie Rennie and Cole Hamilton ideologically, they are Tories anyway, in all but name. But they've carved out no space for themselves as an independent force in the Scottish Parliament, as an independent force in Scotland. And as you say, they're going to suffer the consequences of now not being a recognised party in Parliament, so that they lose their right to an automatic question at Westminster questions. And more to the point, they're going to lose places on committees. So they're going to be, because of their own failures, they're going to be locked out of much of the discussion over the coming year or two.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Now moving on to... Oh yes, and just before I move on, I've just been reminded here, the wonderful thing about the new Parliament is the diversity that's been voted in. There's more women. You've got the first woman of colour. I'm trying to think of everybody here now, so if I forget anybody.
Yes, and you've got the first
the lady with the Labour, Pam Duncan Glancy, the lady who's a wheelchair user, and it just shows how much we have progressed as a nation now. And I was shocked that actually this is the first time we've had such a diverse amount of people being voted into Holyrood, but it's good. But I'm pleased it's happened. I just thought it should have been a lot sooner. But it shows that we are progressing as a progressive country, and more people are being represented at Holyrood. What's your feeling on it?
Oh, yes. I mean, I think anybody looking at this would say that you have to be pleased to see that we've got a parliament that is more representative of the makeup of Scotland as a nation. I mean, that for me is a fundamental point, and that surely must be welcomed by everybody. If I could just say a little personal thing here, since I'm here under the banner of my business Momentous Change, I just want to say how pleased I am that my colleague Michelle Thompson has been elected to the Scottish Parliament.
Fantastic, definitely. I think it's well done to them all, the pro-independent MSPs who have been elected. It's been a good weekend. It's been an emotional roller coaster, but it turned out okay in the end. Now to
but
move
on. It also supplied a good excuse to have a wee dram at the weekend with a smile on my face.
Yeah, I've not done that yet, Roger. I haven't.
Oh, that's dreadful.
I've not had the chance. I was working Friday, and then I was in the studio Saturday, and then by the time I got home Saturday night, I was too tired. But yeah, I still need to have my wee victory dram. I'll be doing that hopefully at the weekend when I'm not working. I don't think I'm working yet. I need to check so far, or whenever I get a day off. Yeah, definitely. But no, and I hope everybody enjoyed a wee victory dram at the weekend. So moving on to the Tories, plans to bypass Scottish Parliament following Holyrood SNP victory, responding to reports in today's Times that the UK government are seeking to bypass the Scottish Parliament and spend money directly in devolved areas in an attempt to shore up support for the union. Kate Forbes has said that if there is more funding to be made available for spending in Scotland, then it should be provided to the Scottish Government through the usual democratic channels. Kate Forbes said it is unsurprising that the Tories are in panic mode in response to last week's emphatic SNP victory, but they need to realise that working together involves doing things with Scotland, not doing things to Scotland. Following their election victory, which the SNP says was won on the back of a clear plan to lead Scotland through the COVID crisis into a recovery, including a full-scale remobilisation of the NHS, Ms Forbes said that if there's funding available to support the SNP government's recovery plans on devolved areas such as health infrastructure, then it should come to Scotland through the established channels. To try and circumvent this process in response to an SNP landslide is frankly bizarre and rides roughshod over the devolved settlement Scotland voted for. Now, Roger, we've kind of touched on this before on the show regarding the Tories planning to do this and talking about this. This is just a deliberate way to undermine the Scottish Government and to basically cut them out of the loop. It's not democratic, as Kate Forbes has said, and yet they're talking about democracy. What do you make of this? What's your opinion on this one?
Well, I think they're going to have a hard job actually doing it. I mean, we've now got elected a very strong Scottish Parliament in terms of those who are supportive of Scottish independence, as we've already talked about, and more importantly, supportive of Scotland and Scotland's progress as a whole. So to try and act against that or to undermine that, I think will get the wrath not merely of parliamentarians, but of the Scottish people. What we've got to remember is it is the Scottish people who elected their parliament and expect their parliament to act on their behalf. I don't think they will take kindly at all to the Tories being seen to attempt to bypass that democratic route in any way. But I think they will have some difficulty in making progress with that plan. The other thing is that they're assuming is effectively the underlying assumption of the Tories is the Scottish electorate can simply be bribed by them. It is an extraordinarily demeaning view they have of the Scottish people, that they can simply be bribed to support the Tories. And I don't think that will play well in Scotland at all. And I certainly would expect that they're going to have more than a little political difficulty in pursuing that strategy.
Yeah. The other thing I was thinking about with this as well, Roger, I mean, politically it's not very democratic, but how would that go legally? You know, because if they're already part of the constitution and the agreement of the unions between England and Scotland with the Parliament, how would that work legally to be able to bypass the, the Scottish Parliament? Would that be with the internal market?
It depends on what areas they try to do it and how they try to do it. And I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but it would certainly seem to me that this is another area that they've got to be extremely careful and don't make themselves susceptible to a legal challenge. And it would be a legal challenge in the Scottish courts and in the name of the Scottish government. And so this is another reason that I think they're going to be more constrained than they may imagine. Right, but I think the major constraint is actually not going to be a legal one. I think the major constraint is going to be the political one that we've just discussed.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, Linda's just said to me the Port Barrel politics
Yeah, I mean that's a bit
regarding,
what I'm saying it
yeah,
is. They think they can just dish out money to bribe the Scottish people. In other words, they're
yeah,
thinking that the only reason people in Scotland vote is dependent upon who's going to dish them out personally the biggest amount of money in return for their vote. There is absolutely no evidence that is what drives voters in Scotland. There is a lot of evidence that the Scottish electorate are really quite sophisticated and they take many factors, including many non-economic factors, into account when they decide where their vote is going to go, and quite right too. So that I think I think even if they were able to push through with this, I don't think they will get the results they expect from it. I don't think Scotland is in the business of pork barrel politics.
yeah, definitely. I think we're a bit more savvier up here, and we are naturally suspicious when it comes to the Tories down in Westminster. So yeah, I don't think it will bode well. I don't think they would. I don't think it would happen as easily as what they think it would be.
Yeah.
Sticking with Westminster, more so Boris Johnson. He's currently being investigated over a Caribbean holiday. Now, Boris Johnson is under investigation over who paid for his Caribbean holiday with Carrie Symonds during Christmas 2019. The Parliamentary Standards Commissioner, Catherine Stone, confirmed this morning that she was investigating a possible breach of the MP's Code of Conduct. It is the latest allegation of impropriety faced by the Prime Minister as the Electoral Commission continues its inquiry into the Conservative Party over claims that a loan to cover the works to Johnson and Symonds' Downing Street flat were not properly declared. The SNP's deputy leader in Westminster, Kirsten Oswald MP, said that with each passing day, another major scandal engulfs the Prime Minister. Whether it's a COVID contract for cronies, taxes for tax breaks, cash for curtains, or £15,000 luxury holidays paid for by mystery donors. A culture of sleaze has consumed the Tories. Miss Oswald said that this latest revelation demonstrates how out of touch the Tories are with millions of ordinary families across the country who struggle to get by when faced with everyday reality of Tory cuts. Now, Roger, I'm going to say I'm certainly not surprised by this. I'm pleased that he is being investigated, but I am unsure in terms of what's going to come out of the investigation and what the end result's going to be. What's your feelings on this? Do you think that there will be some sort of kind of punishment, so to speak, for Boris Johnson, or do you think it's going to be swept under the carpet? Same with the COVID contracts, and because there's been so much lately coming out under his Prime Minister time as Prime Minister with with COVID taxes, with the tax breaks, the really horrible curtains that they paid a lot of money for. So what's your feelings on
Yes, well,
Boris Johnson?
well, yeah, I mean, I agree with what you say. And my understanding is that possibly 2 or 3 weeks away, we can expect even more sleaze allegations to hit the airwaves. But again, that won't really surprise us, will it? This is what is a consistent way in which Johnson and some of his cronies have behaved almost all of their adult lives. And so the notion that they are going to change their behaviour now, I think, is wholly misplaced. And of course, the Westminster system, however, and you've hinted at this, is a very different one to the one in the Scottish Parliament.
Yeah.
The person who will ultimately decide whether Boris Johnson has, for example, broken the ministerial code is not an independent QC, it is Boris Johnson himself. And so the
Yeah.
system in Westminster is one that is, in my view, itself corrupt in carrying out these kinds of adjudications on the behaviour of Boris Johnson and his cabinet. So I'm not holding my breath for anything substantial to happen from that avenue. What we will wait to see is whether in the longer run this plays badly with the electorate to the extent that they begin to turn on the Tories. However, my caution here is we've known for some time about these revelations that have been in the press about Boris Johnson's behaviour. And yet in the elections in England in the last weekend, it's the Labour Party who are being hammered, not the Conservatives. Now, what you can say is that perhaps tells you an awful lot about the Labour Party, that faced with a publicly corrupt Tory party, they're still in retreat in their face. So, yeah, politics in the UK is in a very poor state, I would say, at the moment. And we need to thank our lucky stars in Scotland that we are not mired in that kind of corruption and sleaze that Westminster is.
Yeah, it seems to be. I'm just being told there that someone has put in a freedom of information request in to find out what the First Minister has spent on Bute House and what she has done. And the answer that they received was nothing, which shows you the kind of comparison between Holyrood and Westminster. And that just goes to show you the differences where the two parliaments are worlds apart from each other and how they work and how they operate. But yeah, up here in Scotland,
I think it goes. I think it goes even further than that. I think it goes further than are you obeying the rules. I think it comes down to questions about individual ethics and what people are willing to do. And I don't think Boris Johnson's ethics stand up at all to any realistic scrutiny.
Yeah, I agree. I sometimes, I do believe that his moral compass doesn't work either, which is,
I think what he's got is a financial compass rather than a moral compass.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't think these stories are going to disappear. I think we're going to be hearing more and more reports coming out of, and it'll be interesting to see, but it'll also be interesting to see how Westminster deals with it. And as you say, it's Boris Johnson himself who makes that decision, and that just goes to show you how corrupt Westminster is. And so it'll be interesting to see what's going to happen over the next week or two, or the next month or two, to see what happens. Now, moving on, we're moving over to Israel. Israel police stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque ahead of Jerusalem Day March. Israel police have stormed the sacred Jerusalem site that holds the Dome of the Rock amid mounting international concern over the worsening violence in the city. In advance of the now delayed Israel court ruling on whether authorities were able to evict dozens of Palestinians from the old city's Sheikh Jarrah neighbourhood and give them their homes to Jewish settlers, confrontations had continued until after dawn, when police moved into an old city compound housing the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third holiest site in Islam, and fired stun grenades at worshippers who threw stones. Footage from the scene showed crowds of people running in front of the mosque through clouds of smoke. Following the most serious clashes since 2017, the Palestine Red Crescent reported 305 people have been injured after officers in riot gear clashed with Palestinian demonstrators in East Jerusalem. The mounting toll from the violence came as Israel's police commissioner, Kobe Shabtai, intervened at the last moment following appeals from Israel domestic security agency, the Shin Bet, and Israel military to call off a planned march by Israel nationalists through the Muslim quarter of the Old City amid fears that it could provoke a further escalation. The latest violence occurred as the UN Security Council scheduled closed consultations on the situation in Jerusalem on Monday. The diplomats said the meeting was requested by Tanzania, the Arab representative of the council. Now, Roger, like everybody else, been watching this on the news, seeing reports on social media, and it's just absolutely, it's horrifying. I mean, why the police stormed the site when people were worshipping. And, it's just absolutely, and the thing is, I was kind of reading up on the Dome of Rock, and I didn't realise, I knew about it being sacred to Muslims, but it's also a very sacred place to the Jews as well. So, do this is just absolutely horrendous, never mind affect people from their homes. What's your take on what's been going on over the last couple of hours or last couple of days over in Israel?
Well,
In Palestine?
I think, yeah, I mean, it's dreadful to see the scenes that we've been able to see in our televisions and to hear some of the reports as to what's happening. And of course, this is part of a much longer running story of the conflict that is taking place for a long time in that part of the world. And if I had a magic wand, I would be the first to try and use it to resolve the problems in that part of the world. They are extraordinarily deep-seated historically, extraordinarily deep-seated religiously, and democratic approaches are often very fragile, and that's why when democratic approaches break down wherever in the world, you often or almost always get a resort to some form of conflict or other, and that in part is what we are seeing. So I think from my point of view, if there could be a Scottish perspective on this, it would be this. I was recently talking, and have been talking at some length with my old colleague Stephen Gettings about his book Nation to Nation, and we agreed if there is any role that Scotland could play, it would be to try and be a peacemaker in the world, trying to be a country that does not pretend it can force things through either economic or military might, but can try and use our good offices to try and find a way of creating dialogue and bringing people together, not trying to impose external solutions, but to try and help people find their own solutions. Now, I know that people will say that's a bit romantic because it's extraordinarily difficult to bring these sides together. But because something is extraordinarily difficult, it doesn't mean that you should not make every effort to try and find peaceful ways through this. I mean, to me, the most profound feeling I have is one of very, very deep sadness about what is happening. Mm-hmm. And of course, when these situations occur, the people who are always going to be the ones that suffer the most are the people with the least power and the people with the weakest voice. So it is the poor and the disadvantaged who are going to suffer the most through continuing conflict. And that must be a tragedy for us all.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there, Roger. I would like to see Scotland being a peacekeeper rather than somebody who imposes on others. And I think we've got enough countries that do that already in the world, and we don't have enough peacekeepers. And definitely, one of the things that I've always been told and taught is sometimes the right thing to do is the hardest thing to do. To reach a peaceful solution is not the easiest, but it's the right way to go. And yes, and yeah, I share your sentiments completely with what's happening over there, and I hope they find a peaceful solution before many more innocent people are killed. Now, with that, we're moving on to the US. The US government and Colonial Pipeline are working to secure the pipeline network that transports nearly half of America's East Coast fuel supplies as a shutdown to halt a ransomware cyber attack entered a fourth day today. The attack on Colonial Pipeline last week, one of the most disruptive digital ransom schemes ever reported, has sent shockwaves across the industry. The result, shutting down, has disrupted fuel supply across the eastern United States, triggered isolated sales restrictions at retail pumps, and pushed benchmark gasoline prices to a 3-year high. While the US government investigation into the attack is in its early stages, a former US official and 3 sources said the hackers are suspected to be a cybercriminal group called DarkSide. Cybersecurity experts said the group appears to be composed of veteran cybercriminals focused on squeezing as much money as they can from their targets. Yesterday, Colonial said it had restarted some smaller lines between fuel terminals and customer delivery points, but its main lines remained shut. It did not provide a timeline for a full restart of the 5,500-mile system. A press release posted to DarkSide's website today did not directly mention Colonial Pipeline, but under the heading About the Latest News, it noted that our goal is to make money and not creating problems for society. Now, Roger, I'm going to hold my hands up here and be completely honest. I didn't even realise this had happened. I have been so busy with campaigning and the election and work that I didn't even know this had happened in the US last week. What about you? Were you aware of it, or
Yeah, I wasn't
have you
aware as much as I should have been because I was severely distracted. But the one thing that
yeah,
I do know from, I mean, I'm very friendly with some people at Stirling University and the like who do a lot of research into privacy and cyber issues and the like. This is a growing global problem. The more
yeah,
and more that we are reliant on the types of technologies, including those that we're using today, the more and more
yes,
that criminals and those who want to disrupt will equally use those technologies in the pursuit of their criminal ends or their unjust ends. And so part of the problem here, the insecurity that surrounds much of the internet, it means we are all susceptible. Individuals we know are susceptible to attacks. Groups are susceptible. And there is no country in the world that is completely free from these types of cyber attacks. I mean, what we've got to remember is that the US is probably the most sophisticated country in the world in terms of its capabilities, in terms of cyberspace and the like. And yet, here it is, suffering severe cyber attacks. So this is something everybody has got to be concerned about throughout the world. And Scotland has got to be concerned about it. And we're going to have to need to do an awful lot more thinking about it as we move towards independence as well, to make sure that we are not as susceptible as we may be at the moment to such cyber attacks.
yeah, definitely. And I think that's the kind of world we now live in, as you say, with the technology we use, and the more and more we rely on technology. And so, yeah, that's something we've got to become more aware of. I was just having, while you were talking, Roger, I had never heard of I'd never heard of DarkSide before, but it turns out they're a Russian group. So they're a Russian group of cyber criminals, or however you people want to describe them. So that's quite interesting as well. That it's a Russian. group that's actually being accused or alleged to be carrying out this cyber attack.
Yeah, no, that is interesting. I mean, I don't know whether that is exactly who it is that's undertaking this in the US. I mean, there have been these accusations. I don't know if they've get near to
Well,
proving
this
that.
was. I've just seen this. I've just seen this on the. That's just a statement that's came out through NBC News. Just as
Right,
I was having a nosy, that they are a Russian group. So,
right. But
but
what I
as I
would
say,
say is, if it is, I wouldn't be all that surprised. We do know that in that part of the world, that there's a lot of activity of that sort going on. We are
yeah.
susceptible to it in this country as well. We do know that there's a lot of criminality going on. I mean, if I take an example, I mean, this isn't a cyber example, but when I was a member of Parliament, I ran a campaign against the way in which a thing called Scottish Limited Partnerships are being abused. And a lot of the abuse was
Hmm.
coming from places like Russia, like Ukraine, and the like,
Yeah.
where criminal group, I'm not suggesting the governments, but criminal groups were operating in this way. So, yeah, it's a major global problem. And we're going to have to give it an awful lot more attention, is my view.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's something that we need to be financing more in terms of cyber security. Moving on to Europe, the Dutch government grants $2.4 billion in subsidies to huge carbon storage project. The Dutch government has granted a consortium that includes oil companies, Royal Dutch Shell, ExxonMobil, and around €2 billion in subsidies for what is set to become one of the largest carbon capture and storage projects in the world, the Port of Rotterdam announced yesterday. Shell and Exxon requested the subsidies in January, together with industrial gas suppliers, Air Liquide and Air Products, for a project which aims to capture CO2 emitted by factories and refineries in the Rotterdam port area and store it in empty Dutch gas fields in the North Sea. The companies involved have been told that their applications will be granted, according to a statement by Port spokesman Zach Poppy. This clears the most important hurdle for the project, which will become operational in 2024 and is expected to reduce emissions in the industrial cluster surrounding Europe's largest seaport by around 10%. The Dutch government has said it will grant a total of €5 billion in subsidies in 2021 for technologies that will help it achieve its climate goals. The Netherlands is one of the countries with the highest emissions of greenhouse gases per capita in Europe and is aiming to lower its emissions by 55% relative to 1990 levels by 2030. Now, Roger, regarding this, personally, I would like to see the companies and things lowering their their carbon to start with, so we're not having to worry about storage quite as much. And regarding the carbon storage up in the oil fields in the North Sea, whether it's in the oil fields in the North Sea or in other areas around the world, I have my worries and concerns about how safe this would be and what that would involve long-term future, not short-term future. In terms of leaks and so forth, it might be safe short-term, as in 40 years, 50 years, maybe 100 years, but what happens down the line? What's your take on carbon storage in the North Sea?
Well, I'm not a technical expert, but I was very angry when I heard about this story for the following reason, and that is, it will be what now? Over 5 years ago, when I was speaking in
Mhm.
Parliament in response to one of the budgets, one of my major complaints
Yeah.
was that the UK government killed off the then planned largest carbon storage project for the Peterhead area. I think at the time it was right to say it was going to be the largest in the world, about £1 billion, if memory serves me correctly. And the UK government killed that off when we could have been world leaders. So, I mean, this is another example of where we are being hamstrung in some of these developments because of being tied to Westminster. In terms of the more technical question you asked, what happens in the longer run? Well, my answer to that is don't listen to me, because I'm not a technical expert and I don't know what's going to happen in the longer run. But what I would say is, I think there are demonstrably very important short-term. What do I mean by short-term? 20 to 30 years. There are demonstrable benefits by being able to store carbon, given the urgency of the climate change challenge. So I would have been, as I was back 5 years ago, I was hugely in favour of making sure we could get such developments for the Scottish sector of the North Sea. And, you know, just absolutely dreadful short-sightedness of the Westminster government effectively scuppering that.
Yeah, but then again, we all know that Westminster tend to be quite short-sighted all the time. Or, I was going to say majority, but all the time, which is one of the biggest problems and why we want to break away. Now for the last story of the evening, David Attenborough named COP26 People's Advocate. David Attenborough has been tasked with inspiring action to tackle the issue of climate change as its people's advocate ahead of the United Nations Climate Change Conference in November in Glasgow. It is hoped that COP26 will accelerate measures by the world's biggest polluters to tackle climate change, which activists, scientists and world leaders say is endangering the planet. David Attenborough is the world's most influential wildlife broadcaster, and he will challenge leaders to put climate and the protection of the nature at the top of their agenda at the event over the next 6 months, including at the Group of Seven Summit in Cornwall in June. He has also been invited to address world leaders and the public at the COP26 Glasgow Summit, which has been billed as the most important climate meeting since Paris Agreement in 2015. Now, do you think David Attenborough is perfect as the people's advocate for COP26, or do you think there could have been somebody else that could have been picked to be an advocate? And do you think he is going to be able to basically influence the world leaders on climate change come COP26 in November?
Well, you've asked quite a number of questions there. Let me just pick the ones I want.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, I mean, you're never going to get the perfect person. But to be honest, I've always been a great admirer of David Attenborough, so I get no criticism of him being a people's advocate, and we need a people's advocate. However, what I would say is, we don't just need one advocate, we need lots of advocates. And one of the things I would have liked and still hope we might see in Scotland is putting together a whole team of Scottish advocates in different sectors, so that we can really press the case and show that we can, well, for example, showcase some of the things that Scotland is particularly good at. And we need to mobilise all our Scottish resources in doing so. So that, for example, I had a discussion a few weeks ago with a senior person in the education sector, saying that if it were up to me, what I would be doing is I would be encouraging every college and every university, particularly around Glasgow at the time of COP26, to open up their facilities and to run a whole host of events to attract world leaders, to attract many of the people who will come along with the leaders as advisors and the like, to have discussions in Scotland and to show the role that Scotland can play, because it has a role that it can play in leading the way in a number of fronts. And so that I would like to see, in that sense, a whole team of Scottish advocates as well at this event in Glasgow, and make sure that we mobilise as many resources as possible so that we can encourage the global community to learn from one another, and that includes from Scotland, and so that we can learn from them, and so that we move this agenda forward.
Definitely, completely agree with that there, Roger, and that's a lovely note to finish on tonight's show, and I think it's always important that we all learn from each other. And so thank you very much for joining me this evening, Roger. It's been absolutely a pleasure as always to talk to you, and thank you very much for you guys for watching, and as always, if you would like to subscribe to Broadcasting Scotland and help us out, or just make a small donation, the information is on the screen just now to take you to the website. Please do. This is how we can run our shows and keep the lights on and keep these programmes coming to you. And we're looking to also employ some staff as well, which would be really nice to create some proper jobs. And also as well, we are looking for volunteers to help out. So as always, if you would like to join us, whether it's in front of the screen or behind the screen, or to be a journalist, again, just contact us. The information will be on your screen, and there is a wee volunteers form, and just fill it out. It's actually quite simple. And even if it's something that you've not got experience in, but you thought you would quite like to give it a go, why not? Fill out the form. In the meantime, thank you very much for joining me and Roger this evening at Scotland at 7. And please join us here again tomorrow at 7 o'clock. And who have we got on tomorrow? Right, it's either Andrew or Gordon that's on tomorrow. I'm not 100% sure at the moment, but I'm sure they'll just watch out for the social media updates, and you will see who is presenting and who is a guest tomorrow evening. In the meantime, thank you very much for joining us this evening.